growing up in a home where perfection was not just expected, but demanded. I often found myself fading into the background. My older sister, Emily, was the golden child, always the center of attention, always praised for her flawless grades, impeccable manners, and radiant beauty. It was as though the world was designed for her to shine, and I was left merely as a spectator to her brilliance. There were moments, though, when I would slip through the cracks, when I was seen for just a moment. I remember one such time during my high school graduation. I had worked tirelessly to earn the highest academic honors. And yet, when my name was called, yes, the applause was fleeting as the ceremony continued. Emily's name echoed louder, and her friends cheered the loudest. In that instant, I realized no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough. The comparison between Emily and me was constant, and it wasn't just the grades or the accomplishments that were weighed. It was everything. Every time I spoke, I felt my words were lost in the wind, a mere whisper in the vast silence of her perfection. Even at home, I struggled for a glimpse of attention. Anything that would make me feel seen. When I brought home a trophy for winning a regional science competition, my parents hardly noticed. I sat silently at the dinner table, clutching the award. As Emily recounted her latest achievements, her voice was always louder, and her presence was always brighter. My heart ached for the recognition I never received. Despite all this, I did my best to remain in the background. I focused on my studies, pushed myself harder, and tried to find solace in my own pursuits. I convinced myself that one day I would escape from the shadow that loomed over me. But I was wrong. The expectations of my family, the unspoken pressure to be like Emily, followed me wherever I went. It was in my second year of college when it all fell apart. I met Jake, a quiet, thoughtful guy who didn't care much for the fame or accolades Emily craved. For once, I felt like someone saw me for who I truly was, not as an extension of Emily, but as an individual. His laugh was easy, comforting, and when he looked at me, I felt like I mattered. But little did I know, the moment I brought him home to meet my family, things would take an unexpected turn. The evening was supposed to be simple. Dinner with my parents, introducing Jake for the first time. But as soon as we sat down, everything shifted. Emily, as usual, was the picture of grace. Her golden curls cascaded over her shoulders as she smiled at Jake. I watched as she subtly leaned in, making him laugh a little too hard, and the way his eyes sparkled when they met hers. It didn't take long for me to realize something was off. I excused myself from the table to grab some water, my throat tightening with an unfamiliar pain. By the time I returned, Jake was looking at Emily with a new kind of admiration, something I had never seen before. My stomach twisted into knots, but I stayed silent, hoping it was just a passing moment. The evening dragged on, and I could feel the tension building. My thoughts raced. Could this really be happening again? Was I really invisible? Even to him, my worst fears were realized when, a few weeks later, Jake admitted to me that he had developed feelings for Emily. His words cut through me like a knife. I'm sorry, but she's just everything I've ever wanted. Just like that, my world shattered. For the second time, I watched as Emily took what was mine, effortlessly, as if it was her right. And this time, I couldn't just retreat into the shadows. This time, I had to do something about it. I packed my bags that night, leaving behind my family, the house that had never felt like home, and the girl who had always stolen my light. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape. I rented a small apartment in the city, my heart heavy, but my mind resolute. I knew it was time for me to stop trying to be seen, through someone else's eyes. It was time to create my own story. In the months that followed, I tried to piece myself together in this new, unfamiliar life. I started working at a small coffee shop downtown, where the hours were long and the pay was minimal. But there was a strange kind of peace in the routine. I kept my head down, focused on the grind, and ignored the ache that lingered deep within. But it wasn't enough. I needed something more, something to fill the voids, to help me redefine who I was outside of my family, outside of the shadows of Emily. I started picking up a camera again. It had been years since I'd last held it, but when I did, it felt like something clicked. The weight of it in my hands was grounding, like a lifeline that tethered me to something real. The city was a beautiful chaos, full of life, but also full of stories waiting to be captured. I began to shoot everything. The way the neon lights reflected off puddles on the sidewalk, the people huddled in doorways during a rainstorm, the quiet moments in a diner where patrons sat in silence, lost in their own worlds. The more I shot, the more I felt like I was finding myself again. It wasn't just about taking photos. It was about reclaiming something I thought I had lost: my voice. With each photo, I felt more and more connected to the person I was becoming, and less to the girl I had been in the past. Photography wasn't just a hobby. It was my therapy, my form of expression. I started to share my work online, and the response was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, not by my family or Emily, but by strangers who saw something in my photos that I hadn't known was there. I wasn't invisible anymore. One evening, while editing a photo of the city skyline at dusk, I received a call from Lydia, my cousin. She had always been someone I could count on, even if we hadn't spoken much in recent years. Her voice crackled with excitement as she asked if I wanted to show my work at an art gallery opening. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. It was a big step, but I knew it was the kind of risk I needed to take if I ever wanted to leave my past behind. I agreed, and we spent the next few weeks preparing for the event. My hands shook with nerves as I selected the pieces I felt best represented me. My journey from shadows to light, from being unseen to truly being seen. The opening night was a blur of faces, but one thing stood out. As I stood by my photos, I caught a glimpse of Daniel, a man I'd met a few months prior at the coffee shop. He was kind, patient, and had listened to my stories without judgment. He had seen me for who I was, not who I used to be. I remember the first time we spoke outside of work. He asked me about the photos on my phone, and something about the way he asked made me feel like my work mattered. Over time, we became friends, and then something more. Daniel was unlike anyone I had ever known. He never asked me to be anyone other than who I was. For the first time in years, I felt loved for simply being me. He encouraged me to push myself further, to explore my art, to embrace my future without fear. And then, during that gallery opening, Daniel stood by my side, holding my hand with quiet pride as I spoke with strangers about my work. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel like I was fighting to be noticed. I was finally allowing myself to be seen. I could feel the warmth of his presence, the support he offered. Without words. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. But just as I was beginning to believe I had finally escaped the suffocating grip of my past, it pulled me back in. The phone call came late one night, just as I was about to turn in. It was Lydia again. Her voice was strained. Her words weighed down by urgency. "Daria, it's about Emily," she said. "Things aren't going well. She's in trouble." I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. It had been years since I'd seen or heard from Emily, and the last thing I expected was to be pulled back into her chaotic world. But Lydia continued, explaining how Emily's marriage to Jake had started to unravel. He had become distant, frustrated with his life, and was now drinking heavily. Emily, desperate to hold on to her perfect image, was spiraling. She was spending money she didn't have, trying to maintain the illusion of happiness. Designer bags, expensive trips, lavish dinners. But it wasn't working. The cracks were beginning to show. I listened in silence, my thoughts racing. I made the visual was Samarkand. Part of me felt relief. Relief that I wasn't the one drowning anymore. But another part of me, the part that had spent years trying to prove my worth, felt a strange sense of vindication. Emily, who had always stolen the spotlight, was now losing everything she had worked so hard to protect. As the days passed, I tried to push the thoughts of Emily out of my mind. I had built a life for myself. I had learned to love myself again. And I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her mess. But then the invitation came. It was from my parents. An invitation to a family gathering. The tone was different this time. They wanted me to come, to reconcile, to put the past behind us. It was a chance to heal, to find the closure. I thought long and hard about it. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them, or Emily, or the version of myself that I had left behind. But Daniel was there, supporting me as always, reminding me that closure didn't always mean fixing what was broken. It meant letting go. The day of the gathering, I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. I didn't recognize the person who had walked away from her family all those years ago. I had changed. I was stronger, more confident, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. I wasn't looking for their approval anymore. I wasn't looking for their love. I had learned to love myself. When I arrived at the gathering, I was met with surprised silence. My parents' eyes filled with emotion as they saw me, truly saw me, for the first time in years. Emily, however, looked different. The facade she had carefully crafted for so long was crumbling. She was no longer the golden girl. The cracks were visible to everyone now. In the middle of the conversation, Emily tried to make small talk, but her words were hollow. Her smile was strained, and as she glanced at Jake, who looked exhausted and worn out, I realized something. I wasn't the one who had lost everything. She had. That was when I finally found the words I had been holding back for years. I didn't shout or scream. I simply said, "You always wanted everything, Emily. But sometimes what you take doesn't come without a cost. I hope you're happy now." And with that, I turned and walked away, my heart light for the first time in years. As I left, I could hear my parents calling after me, but I didn't turn around. I had said everything I needed to say. The storm had passed, and I had come out stronger. The life I had built, my art, my love, my freedom was mine, and no one could take that away.